The aircraft wasn't hostile. It wasn't violating airspace, but the system flagged it anyway. On the radar display, the track looked ordinary at first. Small, steady, legally compliant. Its altitude sat inside permitted corridors. Its ground speed stayed within ranges that civilian traffic routinely holds. Its projected path didn't cut across restricted zones or sensitive sites. Nothing about its position triggered an alarm. For several seconds, it blended into the background noise of routine air movement. Dozens of returns, clean routes, predictable trends. The picture was stable. The system was calm. Then one value changed. The confidence score dipped. Not to zero, not enough to sound an alarm, just enough to matter. Not because the aircraft turned sharply, not because it accelerated, but because its behavior didn't resolve the way the system expected it to. The identification layer didn't populate. No transponder handshake, no flight plan match, no track history the system could anchor to. The return was present, but its identity remained blank. Absence alone isn't proof. Civilian aircraft lose transponders. Military platforms suppress them. Unmanned systems may never carry them. The system is built to tolerate that. What it cannot tolerate is a gap that stays open. Correlation tried to close it. Primary radar held the contact at intervals consistent with its range and altitude. Secondary confirmation lagged in a way that shouldn't have happened if the contact was normal traffic. The system pulled expected routes for the corridor and compared them against the aircraft's track. It ran the matching logic again, then again, each pass returning the same result: unresolved. The aircraft wasn't invisible. It was incomplete. Inside the monitoring chain, the software tightened its own thresholds quietly. No warning tones sounded. No public alerts were generated. Nothing was escalated outside the operations picture, but the internal classification changed from routine to unresolved. That single label altered downstream behavior. Buffer zones recalculated around the projected path. Proximity logic adjusted its sensitivity. The system shaded a narrow band around the aircraft's future track, the boundary where proximity stopped being incidental and started becoming a factor. The system didn't call it hostile. It called it uncertain. The track continued on its course, unaware of the reclassification. Nothing about it looked aggressive. Nothing about it looked illegal. But the system had stopped asking what it was. It was now asking whether it still understood the airspace it was responsible for protecting. The next step wasn't an order. It was a timer. If the track remained unresolved long enough, additional layers would activate. Not because someone chose escalation, because the rules engine is designed to prevent uncertainty from drifting into surprise. The timer started. The problem wasn't the aircraft. It was that the system saw something like it again. Minutes later, a second track appeared. Similar altitude, similar signature, similar gaps in identification. Not close enough to be linked by proximity. Not far enough to be dismissed as coincidence. The system didn't declare a pattern. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't speculate. It accumulates. Instead, it adjusted tolerance. Correlation windows widened. Historical layers activated. The system began comparing this contact not only to the air picture in front of it, but to what had appeared earlier, what had vanished, what had failed to resolve, and what had repeated. Confidence values decayed further, not as a verdict, but as a safeguard. The system was moving from trust to verification. The aircraft still hadn't done anything wrong. It hadn't crossed a border. It hadn't entered a prohibited box. It hadn't flown toward a protected asset. It hadn't broadcast a threat. But persistence changed the equation. Uncertainty that repeats stops being noise. It becomes a variable. Across the monitoring chain, thresholds lowered automatically. Not to signal danger, but to reduce surprise. Tracks that would normally age out stayed active longer. Coasting logic tightened. The system stopped accepting brief dropouts as harmless clutter. If a contact blinked, it was treated as data loss, not absence. The air picture began to behave differently. Small anomalies that would normally be ignored were retained for review. Confidence penalties accumulated faster. The system's benign assumption window narrowed. It was no longer asking, "Is this normal?" It was asking, "What if it isn't?" Operators noticed the shift without being told. Displays shaded differently. Update rates increased. The predicted path bands became more conservative. The rules engine began marking decision gates, points on the track where classification would be forced if ambiguity persisted. No one called it an intrusion. No one labeled it hostile. But the airspace was no longer considered settled. The system's concern wasn't a weapon. It wasn't an attack profile. It was an unresolved object repeatedly appearing where the system is supposed to have certainty. That is what escalates. Not danger, incompleteness. The system isn't reacting to threat. It's reacting to uncertainty becoming persistent. And once uncertainty becomes persistent, the system starts preparing for outcomes it cannot yet justify out loud. The response didn't begin with a command. It began with a status change. The air picture shifted from monitoring to managed. That transition unlocked procedures that had been idle but ready. Additional sensors were tasked automatically. Coverage tightened along the projected track. Data refresh rates increased, not to see more, but to miss less. Fusion settings changed to prioritize track continuity over classification confidence. If the system had to choose between knowing and holding, it chose holding. Airspace management rules adjusted in the background. Civilian traffic was spaced differently. Altitude corridors narrowed. Routes were deconflicted farther ahead of time. The system was creating room, not for drama, but for options. Nothing about the response was visible to the outside. No public alerts, no official statements, no dramatic movement on the horizon. But inside the system, the contact was no longer tolerated as an unknown. Readiness rose without fanfare. Interceptor posture increased, not as a scramble, but as a staged condition. Aircraft were not launched into the sky with sirens and noise. They were placed into a shorter decision loop. Pilots were briefed, not shouted at. Ground crews shifted to a tempo that assumed escalation could become necessary with minimal notice. Decision paths were preloaded, not executed. Rules for identification were staged in layers. Visual confirmation if feasible. Radio challenge if appropriate. Non-lethal routing pressure if required. Engagement only if the object forced the system across a legal threshold. Every step assumed restraint. The system did not try to identify the aircraft by force. It did not compel it to respond. It did not announce itself in a way that would turn uncertainty into a public event. Instead, it prepared for the moment when ambiguity could no longer be contained. If the aircraft deviated, the system was ready. If it descended, the system was ready. If it accelerated toward a sensitive site, the system was ready. If it vanished, the system would absorb the gap and hold the air picture stable. What changed wasn't aggression. It was control. The airspace adjusted around the unknown. Quietly, precisely, and without escalation rhetoric. The system was doing what it was built to do. Contain first, explain later, and the system didn't need consensus to begin. It only needed the contact to stay unresolved long enough for procedure to take over. The moment everyone expected never arrived. The aircraft didn't accelerate. It didn't descend. It didn't cross a line that would force the system's hand. For a time, it remained exactly what it had been from the beginning. Present, compliant, unresolved. Then the track degraded. Not abruptly, not dramatically. Just enough for confidence to fall below persistence thresholds. Primary radar held intermittently, returns appearing, then thinning, then returning again. Secondary confirmation never arrived. The system ran another reconciliation pass, then another. It tried to fuse the returns into a single trusted track. It could not. The contact aged out. On the display, it didn't vanish like a switched-off light. It dissolved. Confidence decayed. Prediction bands widened. The shaded buffer collapsed back into normal airspace coloring. The picture stabilized again. Buffers relaxed. Traffic patterns returned to nominal spacing. From the outside, nothing had happened. No intercept was announced. No engagement confirmed. No explanation offered. No statement that anything was wrong in the first place. Inside the system, the event was already closing. Logs were written with exact timestamps and confidence curves. Anomaly flags were archived. Sensor performance metrics were saved alongside the track history. The contact was stored not as a threat, but as a reference, a signature of unresolved behavior. Operationally, the response chain had worked. The system tightened, managed, and then released. The airspace remained controllable. No surprise was allowed to develop into an emergency. But the question that triggered the alert was never answered. The system never learned what the aircraft was, only that it had existed long enough to matter, and then didn't. Somewhere between presence and absence, the contact left behind a problem the system cannot solve with procedure alone. What do you do when an object is compliant but not interpretable? The event ended. The uncertainty remained. Procedural success did not equal understanding, and that gap is the consequence. Modern air defense systems are not built to eliminate uncertainty. They're built to survive it. The system did not fail because it never identified the aircraft. Identification was never the requirement. Control was. When behavior doesn't resolve, the system doesn't demand answers. It narrows margins. It reduces tolerance. It reshapes the environment until surprise becomes unlikely. This is the core doctrine of modern response systems: containment over clarity, continuity over certainty. In this model, attribution is optional. Intent is inferred only when it becomes unavoidable. Action is delayed as long as containment holds. That restraint isn't hesitation, it's design. Because escalation is not triggered by aggression alone. It is triggered by uncertainty that refuses to disappear. Repeated uncertainty becomes a risk vector, not because it proves hostility, because it forces the system to operate without trusted assumptions. And modern systems cannot allow that for long, so they adapt, quietly, automatically, procedurally. They adjust traffic, they tighten buffers, they stage response options. They prepare for outcomes they cannot yet justify publicly. The system doesn't need to know who you are, only that you don't fit. And when you don't fit, the system moves. Before anyone speaks, before anyone argues, before anyone decides. The airspace doesn't need to understand everything. It only needs to remain intact.